Well, hello. I've got a story for you that has been requested of me by several of my old-time friends. It's a story of the One Arm Brakeman. Way back when, trains used to have manually operated brakes. The brakeman would have to run across the tops of the boxcars, and a wheel at the end of a shaft coming up from the end of the car. He'd have to turn it, apply the brakes when the train's going down a hill. Another one of his jobs was to get in between the cars and disconnect and connect when they're in the freight yards. This story takes place on a freight yard and in the town of Constantia at Camp Wood, and also at Camp Woodland, a Boy Scout camp north of Constantia on Kibbe Lake Road. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, this young guy graduated high school. He lived in Constantia, and he got a job on the railroad where it ran through Constantia as a brakeman. Back in those days, the brakeman running across the top of the cars was long gone. Brakes were automatic, but the brakeman still had to work in the freight yards disconnecting cars. And it was a very dangerous job. Sometimes the brakeman would be in between the cars doing whatever he does there to connect or disconnect the car, and the train would unexpectedly move, and he'd get part of him crushed. Maybe a finger, maybe a hand, maybe an arm, maybe his whole body. This new employee of the railroad, working his first summer in the little freight yard in Constantia, it happened to him in September. He was doing whatever he does in between the cars. The chain moved and crushed the lower portion of his right arm. They rushed him to the hospital in Syracuse. Saved his life, but they couldn't save his arm. Back in those days, they didn't have the technology they have today, where you could get a artificial hand that would work. So they fitted him the standard of the day, a stainless steel hook. When somebody loses one of their sensories or part of their body, other sensories or body parts become stronger and better. One day at dusk, an elderly couple are driving down Kibbe Lake Road, and where the Kibbe Lake Road crosses over the railroad tracks, down by what used to be Toper's garage and gas station. They looked to the west. They saw a shadow of a man bending over, standing up. They were curious. They stopped and watched for a few minutes. Standing over, bending up, bending over, standing up, however you want to say it. They didn't think anything of it and went on home. The next day, the train's coming down the tracks. The train rolled down the embankment. What could have possibly done this? They reported what they had seen after the accident had happened. Well, it seems that this kid that was injured, collecting disability payments, had money. He was drinking in the local bars and telling everybody that he's going to put the railroad out of business. Well, they went and inspected what happened there, where the rails rolled over. They discovered that the railroad spikes had been removed. Now the railroad has a very special tool to get spikes out of a rotted or cracked tie that has to be replaced. It's an iron bar about 8 foot long, and at the very end of it is a semi-curved cup-like hook, like a claw on a hammer, where two men pushing on the one end of this, the thing would act as a fulcrum where the little bend and claw-shaped hook is, and they could work the railroad spike out of the ties. And the results of this action would put a big semicircle dent in the tie where the spike was pulled out of. But on inspection, the ties where these spikes were missing didn't have any dents in them. So, through deductions and figuring stuff out, they figure that this brakeman kid was pulling the spikes out of the railroad ties with his hook. Uh-oh, what's going on? Well, a few months later, the same thing happened in the same area. Train coming down the tracks, the track flips over, the train rolls down the bank, train gets wrecked, yada yada. So the railroad eventually went out of business, because this kept going on for a while. Insurance companies wouldn't insure them, nobody would ship with them, so they ran out of money. Tracks eventually were tore up, sold for scrap, ties were removed. The right-of-way went back to the county because there's no taxes being paid on the property. They made it into a snowmobile trail. I wonder how the brakeman's living. Nobody knows where he lived. After the fact, it turns out that people have camps up there. Family camp, cabins that they go to on the weekends and stuff. And in the wintertime, they shut them down. But apparently the brakeman was making himself at home at these unoccupied camps when the people weren't around. That's how he was living and how he was eating food that they had stored away there. But that's not the problem. The problem is people are disappearing. People that live in the town, they're outdoorsmen. The town is 90% forest, not a lot of open land. So hunting is real good. Somebody come home from work, have dinner, tell the family, well, I'm going out to do a little hunting before it gets too dark. They don't come home. They go out looking for them. You tell them where it was going to be. So they go looking for them in that area. No sign of them. But there is signs of something being dragged. And there is signs of blood. And all these drag marks always end up going to the muck, the swamp. Now these swamps up there, originally they were kettle ponds. Kettle ponds are little lakes that were formed when the glacier was melting. The waterfalls coming off the glacier, the melted water, would come crashing down and erode out a bowl-shaped area where the water was crashing down. And over the eons, they would fill in with decayed vegetation. And it would turn into a black muck. If you were to step out on a muck, you'd sink right up to your knees or your waist or however far down it was to the hard bottom. In some places this muck can be 10, 12, 15 feet deep before you hit bottom. If you were to fall into it where it's deep, it'd be like falling into a swimming pool of jello. You can't swim in it. You can't walk on it. You can't float on it. You just go into the muck, never to be seen again. So they suspect somebody's walking through the woods hunting, or whatever. There's always somebody alone. Brakeman may be hiding behind a tree, and an unsuspecting person come by, and Brakeman jump out and with his big stainless steel hook take a swing at him and stab that hook right through his neck or wherever and drag him off to the muck and heave him into the muck. When I was ranger at the Boy Scout camp, it was my job. There were 2 instances there that I have first-hand knowledge of. There's cabins down in the camp, and in the off summer camping season, these cabins are rented out to Boy Scout troops so they can have a weekend out without concerns about the weather, because up there in that area you could get a snow squall at any time. So it just made it safer when you're taking the kids out camping. There's one cabin, Kiwanis Cabin it was called. I guess it was funded by the Kiwanis Club. Years ago it was a kitchen, a summer kitchen, but they converted it into a cabin. The bunks were arranged along the outside walls, and they'd be the beds pass in front of the windows. And this one scout was sitting on his bunk. It's about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. They were all sitting around, chewing the fat, telling stories and so on, yada yada. And the boy hears a twig snap or something outside this window. And he got scared, and he don't know why, but he just jumped off his bed. Just as he jumped off the bed, this hook on an arm comes crashing through the window and jams into the mattress, and then it drags the mattress out through the broken window. And I hear footsteps running off into the distance. That was scary. But the real scary one, the one that really got to me, there was this big troop camping in a cabin at the end of the road. The name of the cabin was Allman Lodge. It was built in honor of a scouter who got killed in a car crash. And it's on the edge of this big muck swamp. Now there's a plank trail, and there's these tufts of things growing up in the swamp, and you could jump from one to the other and get across the swamp. They had places with planks where you needed them that you could walk on. Good camping on the other side of the swamp. Well, this one scout, older scout, experienced, was working on Wilderness Survival Badge. And one of the requirements is he has to sleep overnight in a shelter he made himself. So he wanted to go do this chore on a Saturday night. The scoutmaster said, "Okay, you're experienced. You can go. We'll know where you are because we'll see the smoke from your fire." And a little while later, they saw the smoke coming up from the campsite the boy had made on the other side of the swamp. And the boy was told that you got to be back by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning because we have to leave to get back. So it got to be 10 o'clock. But no boy. Got to be 10:30. Still no boy. Well, they came up and got me to come help them look for him. We went across the swamp. We found the campsite. Well, the wilderness shelter the boy had built was totally destroyed. The campfire was trampled on and scuffled and stuff scattered all over. The canteen was laying on the ground, flattened where it had been stepped on. And there were signs of something being dragged from the campsite down to the edge of the swamp. We looked and looked and couldn't find nothing. The boy was gone. Nobody knows what happened to him, but it's suspected that the brakeman got him. I'll never forget that. I gotta shut this off. I'm sorry.